Good evening, everybody. I'm Father Sergio from the Ecumenical Patriarchate, the Sacred Archdiocese of Italy and Malta. And I will speak about, my title is Hierarchical Ecclesiology versus Eucharistic Ecclesiology, focusing on a misunderstanding. The concept of hierarchy had an extraordinary fortune and affirmed through its capacity to offer an iconic description of the organization of a church in which the spiritual order of incorporeal is also reflected. From it, a hypostatic cosmology proceeds, which is capable of depicting the biblical vision of the world and to set a paradigmatic distinction with respect to the ancient vision of the world, especially to the Platonic, dualistic, self-centered system. Depending on the historical context, hierarchy has received adaptation which reflect the transformation that have occurred in the exterior structure of a church. But it also had an extraordinary fortune outside its original semantic sphere, becoming synonymous in the most of the current Western languages of any structure of power, prerogative, or responsibility. It should, however, be emphasized that the origin of this concept is strictly ecclesiological, since hierarchia derives from hierarchies, that is, the principle of priesthood. In the intention of who coined this term, it indicates the bishop, which is depository of the priesthood of the New Testament, as successor of the apostles. The term hierarchy, as it is well known, was invented by Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite. Certainly this term constitutes the luckiest of all of the neologisms invented by him. Hierarchy arises from the ecclesiological reflection of Dionysius on the transmission of the goods bestowed by the divine goodness. It should also be mentioned that historiography of the last century, following textual discoveries that allowed to associate Pseudo-Dionysius to the Neoplatonic school of Proclus in Athens, has shown a tendency to interpret hierarchy as an ontological system that implies a degradation of beings from a superior layer of being to an inferior one. However, this juxtaposition is misleading because hierarchy, according to Dionysius, is an arrangement between individuals of the same nature, angels and men. And although the term was invented by himself, the distinction between the orders of the church and the angels were part of ecclesiastical traditions in centuries. While the fortune of this term was so largely widespread, so was its use in distant contexts and with different meanings from the original intention of its maker and the Byzantine authors who proposed ecclesiological treatises on this topic. In addition to the misleading suspicion of a Neoplatonic origin of the term, the political meaning that the term has assumed in the common languages has turned back with negative accent to the ecclesiological context, becoming synonymous with an exercise of ecclesiastical prerogatives as a form of despotic, absolute, non-participated power. Hierarchy is then perceived at the antipodes of what are the expectations of a democratic management of a power, which can be found currently at the basis of a widespread vision of a church. These aspects emerged clearly from the comments of the criticism addressed to the organization of a Great and Holy Council of the Orthodox Church, which was held in Crete in 2016. In fact, the Council has been viewed as excessively hierarchical, as its decision-making moment was in the competence of a bishop alone, even though secular theologians had been invited to join the delegations. The first observation is that if we limit ourselves to this idea of what is hierarchical, we risk to introduce into the Orthodox consensus a sort of secularized vision of its ecclesiastical past, as shaped by procedures and features that today are no longer admissible. So the seven ecumenical councils, starting from the Council of Nicaea, which in Byzantine sources is referred to as the Synod of the 318 Fathers, are part of a modality of synodality that today we would not like to repeat, preferring other ways, more enlarged at the base. In this sense, it is important to underline the observation of theologian Dimitrios Batrellos in a commentary published in the French magazine Contacts, that the Great and the Holy Council of Crete has not been able to take into account in any way the Eucharistic Ecclesiology, which today embodies a major trend in Orthodox ecclesiology, implying the lack of participation of the lay in the decision of the Council. Now, the data that we consider important to underline is that in the contemporary Orthodox conscience, the perception of an incompatibility between the perspective of a Eucharistic ecclesiology and the existence of a hierarchical prerogative in the organization of the life of a church seems to emerge. This contrast must be investigated to the extent that it is not foreign to the various conflicts that today divide orthodoxy and are of the same order as the different perception of a relationship between primacy and conciliarity. The theme is broad, so I will focus here only on the problem of a relationship between Eucharistic ecclesiology and hierarchical ecclesiology. For this reason, we must first of all focus our attention on the theologian to whom we owe the theological rediscovery of the role of the Eucharist and as an unavoidable ground of a church life, Nikolai Afanasieff. On the basis of a famous metaphor for which in ecclesiology 1 + 1 always make 1, Afanasieff conceived every community in which the Eucharist is celebrated as embodying the pleroma of a Catholic Church. The local church is therefore the Eucharistic community and not the diocese, which had a later development, and the original function of a person presiding over the Eucharist does not differ originally from the office of a bishop. The Eucharistic ecclesiology of Afanasieff, in principle, does not need any superstructure than the condition affirmed in the Logion reported in Matthew 18:20, when 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, etc. A fortiori, this criterion does not imply any idea of a hierarchy, which Afanasieff certainly does not deny, but interprets as a superstructure of historical and contingent evolution of a church. Acknowledging the importance of Afanasieff's contribution to the rediscovery of the Eucharistic perspective in ecclesiology, and in consideration of his fortune, the Metropolitan of Pergamon, John Zizioulas, had to make an important corrective to Afanasieff's ecclesiology. Let me recur here to a trendy term in Orthodoxy, that is corrective. It's a matter here of a hierarchical corrective. A quote from a paper of Metropolitan John, Afanasieff on Eucharistic ecclesiology. Afanasieff's equation of a church with a celebration of Eucharist to cure has to be corrected. It is not the parish, but what we call now the diocese, id est, the episcopocentric liturgy. Zizioulas attributes to the influence of liberal Protestant theology of the 19th century Afanasieff's acquaintance with the idea of a freedom of the spirit, which justify his dismissal of every form of institution and law from the very essence of a church. Agreeing with the Slavophiles, Afanasieff did not conceive the church as an institution, but as a charismatic community, while every idea of organization, authority, structure, and a fortiori hierarchy will be incompatible with the nature of a church, which is an Eucharistic event. Zizioulas criticized this aspect. I quote, "Equally questionable is Afanasieff's understanding of the Eucharistic ecclesiology as irreconcilable with the canon law and hierarchical structure in the Church. The Eucharist is inconceivable without the bishop, it is without a protos or a proedros, and these affect all levels of a church organization. There is a primacy and hierarchy in the Church, which, however, does not imply an authority and a potestas residing in an individual ministry, but emerges from communion and a relationship with a community. All forms of pyramidal hierarchy and individual authority vanish in Eucharistic Ecclesiology. End of quotation. This Eulas develops the ecclesiological notion of hierarchy in a horizontal sense, since he conceives the local church as an outpouring of a source of its unity, which is the bishop. The priests are the extensors of the Eucharist of a bishop on the different altars of a diocese, as it is proved by the fermentum and the antimension. Metropolitan of Pergamon did not focus on the distinction between the function of a bishop and that of a priest, assuming that it was a matter of a geographical quantitative justification in the horizontal sense. But then, coming back to Afanasieff's ecclesiology, we may ask why the two functions differed, especially when in the first centuries celibacy was not binding on the bishops. Why did not the Church modeled on Afanasieff's model, but underwent a hierarchical development since the early centuries? Thus we arrive at the fundamental node, that is to understand what really implies the notion of hierarchy. Is it a posteriori descriptive concept? Is it due to Dionysius and to the influence on him of a model of a church organized according to the Roman imperial model, in a geographical sense, but also of division of responsibilities? Or is it a notion that expresses an essential aspect of a church formation and organization? If we go back to the scriptural roots of the formation of a hierarchy, we find the reason mentioned in Acts 6:17, which apparently found its cause in the numerical growth of a community of believers. But the distinction recalled by Luke between the 12 and the 7 men chosen as deacons is relating to their function. The 7 were appointed to serve tables, while the 12 give themselves continually to prayer and to the ministry of the word. And again, is Christ himself who attributed to the 12 special prerogatives in the knowledge of the mystery of the kingdom of God, according to the parable of a sower in Matthew 13:11. These distinctions in the ways of transmitting the word of God and distinct functions in the apostolic community prove that the hierarchical organization was already in place in the foundation of a church by the will of its divine institutor. The founding moments, the Last Supper and the Pentecost, are marked by the presence of the 12 only, not of a crowd of the people who attended to the discourse on the mountain. Dionysius pretends to be part of the apostolic church, but transposed in it the developed hierarchical church of the 6th century. The anachronism is only formal, while the hierarchical factor is already at its place in the apostolic church. The Dionysian understanding of a church as an ecclesiastical hierarchy sees its most important part not so much in its gradual structure, but in its energetic function, which is the transmission of the thearchical, that is the divine in the Dionysian language, the thearchical gifts. The transmission from above, which is pointed out since the very beginning of the celestial hierarchy through the quotation from the Epistle of James. This transmission is not just a mechanical transmission, but involves a synergy determined by the capacity of a response of the recipient. Furthermore, it does not involve any ontological degradation, because the recipients are all of the same nature, angels and men. The hierarchy involved, on the contrary, an hypostatic order. The recipients of the gifts from above are the members of the hierarchy, that is, the angelic or human persons with their degree of greater or lesser closeness to God, a degree that Dionysius measures by the triad of purification, illumination, and perfection or union. Hierarchy is therefore the hypostatic order of deification. Every intellectual and rational hypostasis occupies a position in the hierarchy. Dionysius stresses that by recurring ad abundantiam to the formula catanalogiam. As mentioned, Dionysius illustrates the structure of a church by describing the order of the sacraments. And the Eucharist is presented as the sacrament that perfects every other. Dionysius defined the Eucharist as the most hierarchical of the mystery, hierarchiotaton. The visible form of partaking in the Holy Eucharist is in the Church manifests iconically the real participation in Christ. The sacraments are hierarchical in that they are the operation in which the synergy is realized between the human sacramental action, which Dionysius calls hierurgia, and the divine action that he calls theurgia, recalling to a Neoplatonic well-known word. I quote from the Celestial Hierarchy 3.1, the goal of hierarchy then is to enable beings to be as like as possible to God and to be at one with Him. A hierarchy as God as its leader of all understanding and action. The unifying and defining purpose of a hierarchy is the same as that of a divine Eucharist and is summarized in it. Hierarchical ecclesiology, in its Dionysian cradle, reflects, therefore, an undeniable Eucharistic ecclesiology, even if it is matter of a vertical ecclesiology that does not take into account its horizontal geographical extension. It is clearly an episcopocentric Eucharistical ecclesiology, since the hierarchy is summarized in the hierarchy. This implies that the structure in the Dionysian comprehension of a church has a hypostatic foundation in the person of the hierarchy. Primacy is therefore a foundational attribute of the ecclesiastical hierarchy, according to Dionysius, as the hierarchy guarantees the unity of the hierarchy. In Dionysius, primacy is much more evident than synodality. However, this latter is not absent. Moving to the conclusions and coming back to the Council of Crete, we should ask if in the hierarchical organization of a church we must really see disregarded Eucharistic ecclesiology conceived as the sacrament of the assembly. According to the Dionysian path on which we have walked, this is not the case. In fact, hierarchy establishes, protects, and manifests the inner unity of a church. Dionysius defines the celebration of the Eucharist as synaxis, meaning by this term the unity of the holy people of God gathered around the bishop. For Dionysius, the lay baptized are members of the hierarchy and have precisely hierarchical function, as for example is indicated in their role in good fatherhood. But where this comprehension of a church fails, we perceive a symptom of a spiritual crisis. The first emergence of this crisis is perceiving the hierarchy as a rivalitarian contrast between clergy and lay people that break its unity. Eucharistic life has to suffer consequently from this breaking. The contrast between clergy and laity introduces a secular mind in the church. The so-called lay in the hierarchical vision are in fact members of the hierarchical in their journey in purification, illumination, and perfection. The drift of clericalism is specular to the drift of laicism in the church. Hierarchy expresses the unity as a transmission from above that meets the synergy from below, but transmission from below cannot find any place in the church. And the paradigm of this model of transmission is the Trinitarian perichoresis. Its symbol is the triangle, whose summit, the protos, is the source, but not prevents the communication between the lower angles. This model should not be confused with the pyramidal one, which represents the exact opposite and can be used to symbolize the mundane power. The summits controls the lower side, but these are divided and cannot communicate among them. The hierarchy, as symbolized by the triangle, is the hierarchy in the Dionysian sense, and it expresses the Eucharistic Hierarchical Ecclesiology, and can be aligned to the perichoretic Trinitarian ecclesiology established by the 34th Apostolic Canon. Vice versa, the ontocratic structure of a pyramid, which follow the strategy divided et imperat, is the model wherewith the hierarchies must not be confused. Why? Because the Church is the hierarchy that constitutes the eschatological event already in the present time, recovering the spiritual comprehension of the hierarchical model of the Church as expression of its unity in love and in communion, purifying it from a mundane misinterpretation, is therefore a good way to take in order to healing some divisive distortions that have introduced in the body of the Church nowadays. Let's say that in the first place, the divisive distortion based on the ethnic criterion, since these ethnic concerns are coming by the post-Babeli confusion, and then they deny the Pentecost. But also the confusion between hierarchy and nomos, which led to expect the Church to assume a catechontic function. One of the most important and subtle achievements of the Holy and Great Council of Crete has been that of shedding light on the catechontic temptation by which the Holy Church is tempted at not only recently. This temptation is acting already since long years. Paraphrasing Karl Marx, we can say that a spectre is haunting orthodoxy, and the name of this spectre is Ruski Mir. The ideological project renews the ideology of the Third Rome, which sees in Moscow the last bulwark of Christianity before the parousia. The expression Ruski Mir involves a mixture of mundane and ethnic aspects, both irreconcilable with the Unitarian vocation of the ecclesiastical hierarchy in its maximal expression, that of Catholicity. This vision is irreconcilable with the ecclesiological principle of primacy and conciliarity. So the Holy and Great Council of the Church, the Orthodox Church of Crete, aimed at renewing the conscience of this principle, and because of that, the Russian Church ran out in the night chasing its own spectre. Due to this abandonment, which is superficially perceived as a failure of the Council, paradoxically, the Council succeeded in revealing the temptation of confusing the catechontic function with the mission of the Church. After the diagnosis, a treatment is expected in order to heal the ecclesiastical body. The answer to this necessity, the treatment, arrived certainly unexpected but totally consistent from the reaffirmation of the distinction between the ecclesiastical hierarchy and the prerogative of the nomos of his word that work out the divisions and raises limits and boundaries, recognizing the legitimacy of the nomos to work its prerogatives. When the aspiration for territorial independence of the Ukrainian nation were acknowledged as a treatment to heal the involvement of the Holy Church in the catechontic project of the Ruski Mir. Therefore, the kenotic decision of the hierarchotatus of our hierarchy, His Holiness the Patriarch Bartholomew and his synod, of granting autocephaly to the new church in Ukraine can be understood in this light as healing the church from its actual major and dangerous temptation. Thank you very much.